Putting the right soldier in charge. I'm Brian Lilly with the Rebel.media. I'm trying to understand our defense minister. I really am, but it's difficult. First off, let me tell you, nothing that I'm going to say here takes away from the service that Harjit Sajjan has given to our country. He served in the reserves from 1989 until he was discharged upon becoming Minister of Defense. Deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, Bosnia once, decorated for his work, his skills sought out by the Americans who asked that Lieutenant Colonel Sajjan be assigned to work with their commanders in Afghanistan. That is all admirable. In fact, it's amazing. He earned the term badass. He deserves it. But his skills on the battlefield may not translate into the skills we need in a defense minister. As anyone with military experience can tell you, a good foot soldier doesn't always make a good commander. It's the same in business. Being the best in your field doesn't mean that you're going to make a good manager, that you will be the right CEO. And Sajjan is essentially the CEO of the military. So what has me worried? What, considering all his work, all his experience in the field, has me concerned? Well, it's just that he might be great in the field, but not the right guy to be calling the shots at the top. One of his first interviews as defense minister, Sajjan actually said that we should have dealt with ISIS diplomatically before we had to deal with them militarily. That sounds fine as long as you don't know what ISIS is. They're a group not interested in diplomacy, but in recreating the Islamic Caliphate and having all of us submit to their will, their view of Islam. Sajjan didn't elaborate much on that point about diplomacy at the time, but he gave a speech last week that, to a left-wing group called Canada 2020. He was speaking among progressive friends, dropped his guard maybe, expounded on his theories, including lessons learned on the battlefield. Some interesting points in what was mostly, though, a muddled speech, because Sajjan was too much in his own head. He couldn't get to his point, couldn't articulate much beyond saying, we've got to get this right next time. We can't make mistakes fighting ISIS. Then he mentioned dealing with original grievances to stop groups like ISIS. Listening to Minister Sajjan, he believes that ISIS and their success is partly the result of climate change.
The issues of climate change, of creating grievances in many different parts of the world. Not a big deal when you talk about climate change on isolation, but put it into an area of Africa or Syria, which caused those grievances when the cost of food started to go up and people started to complain. All they wanted to do was listen to. That was that little clue.
Now, this idea has been claimed by many people, but it's simply not true. Yes, there was a multi-year drought in the area, but that didn't lead to the Civil War. There's been some crazy studies with faulty data that have tried to make the link, but they've even been debunked by the very left-wing climate change cheerleading publication called The Guardian. But to Sajjan, climate change is the answer. And if we dealt with that earlier, ISIS wouldn't be an issue.
Mr. Speaker, I learned my lessons working with our allies. And what I said at the speech at the Canada 2020 is when I was actually working with them and learning about the issues that allows radical organizations to take advantage of certain issues and then having to form coalitions after the fact. And what I want to be able to ask the member opposite is, where was their government in looking at those issues? Why did they allow such an issue to get so big and not attack ISIL when it was a small organization?
Now again, the theory doesn't hold up. Doesn't deal with their ideology, their goal to dominate through the caliphate. So I asked him after question period about his original grievance comments.
It's about understanding how radical organizations take advantage of grievances within populations. And those are the things we need to take a look at, because if we don't understand that function of it, when we do defeat ISIS, we need to be able to look at why the people at that time were able to be sucked in by their ideology. And these are the lessons that we learned in Afghanistan, and Canada can play a great contribution to this. And this is why I learned the lessons alongside the coalition partners.
Sajjan cites his Afghan experience, and again, I applaud his service to the country, I applaud his experience. But he sounds like he's fighting the last war, as so often happens with soldiers. Dealing with ISIS, the whole conflict in Syria and Iraq, is very different from Afghanistan. ISIS wasn't just able to conquer large swaths of territory because they took advantage of grievances, although there's a good chance that's part of it. ISIS was able to take over huge chunks of territory because They became the strong horse in a region of the world ripped apart by years of fighting, a government thrown back on its heels, a multi-front civil war, and a power vacuum. And I must add, this is a civil war that was started by the Arab Spring, aided and abetted, cheered on by Western leaders like Barack Obama and many European leaders who wanted to see dictators go and democracies come in. One leader that was sounding the note of caution, if anyone bothered to listen back then, was Stephen Harper. He worried that all of this would mean women, children, and minorities would be targeted. Guess what? He was right. I have no definitive declaration to make about Minister Sajjan, but I am concerned. During Monday's question period, former Defence Minister Jason Kenney heckled that he needed an English-to-English translation for Sajjan's comments. Liberals claimed Kenney was being racist. That's rubbish. Sajjan was being incoherent, like he mostly was while speaking at Canada 2020. He goes in circles, he makes odd references, he searches for a point while he speaks. One thing I haven't seen him do is speak clearly. That may be because he's in over his head. This may be a man that makes a great warrior, a good officer, a good commander on the ground, but a rotten minister. The man who has to make decisions at the highest level rather than simply advise. Is Harjit Sajjan the man to do that? Time will tell, but at this point, color me skeptical.